The Latins, sometimes known as the Latians, were an Italic tribe which included the early inhabitants of the city of Rome. From about 1000 BC, the Latins inhabited the small region known to the Romans as Old Latium, that is, the area between the river Tiber and the promontory of Mount Circio 100 km share of Rome. The Latins were an Indo-European people who probably migrated into the Italian peninsula during the Late Bronze Age. Their language, Latin, belonged to the Italic branch of Indo-European. Their material culture, known as the Latial culture, was a distinctive subset of the Iron Age Villanovan culture that appeared in parts of the Italian peninsula after 1000 BC, although divided from an early stage into communities which mutated into several independent, and often warring, city-states. The Latins maintained close culture-Euro-religious relations until they were definitively united politically under Rome in 338 BC, and for centuries beyond. These included common festivals and religious sanctuaries. The rise of Rome as by far the most populous and powerful Latin state from c. 600 BC led to volatile relations with the other Latin states, which numbered about 14 in 500 BC. In the period of the Tarquin monarchy, it appears that Rome acquired political hegemony over the other states. After the fall of the Roman monarchy in c. 500 BC, there appears to have been a century of military alliance between Rome and the other Latins to confront the threat posed to all Latium by raiding by the surrounding Italic mountain tribes, especially the Volsci and Equi. This system progressively broke down after c. 390 BC, when Rome's aggressive expansionism led to conflict with other Latin states, both individually and collectively. In 341–338 BC, the Latin states jointly fought the Latin War against Rome in a final attempt to preserve their independence. The war resulted in 338 BC in a decisive Roman victory. The other Latin states were either annexed or permanently subjugated to Rome. Name etymology. It has been suggested that the name Latium derives from the Latin word latus, referring, by extension, to the plains of the region. If this is true, then Latini originally meant men of the plain. Origins. The Latins belonged to a group of Indo-European tribes, conventionally known as the Italic tribes, that populated central and southern Italy during the Italian Iron Age. The most common hypothesis is that the Italic peoples migrated into the Italian peninsula among the Ligurian tribes sometime during the Italian Bronze Age and the Apennine culture. The most likely migration route was from the Balkan Peninsula along the Adriatic coast. The archaeological record shows a remarkable uniformity of culture in the peninsula during most of the Bronze Age. From 1800 to 1200 BC, the so-called Apennine culture, pottery with much the same incised geometric designs is found throughout Italy, and the design of weapons and tools was also homogeneous. During this period, it appears that Italy was a heavily wooded land with a sparse population, concentrated in the mountainous center of the peninsula. Most people were pastoralists practicing transhumance and living in, at most, small villages. Inhumation was the universal method of burial. However, in the Italian Late Bronze Age, cremation burials and distinct regional variations in culture appeared. Some historians have ascribed these changes to the arrival of the Italic peoples, but the distribution of the novel cremation culture is lacking in the central, mountainous region of the peninsula dominated by the Italic tribes, and is concentrated in Etruria, the region populated by the Etruscans. This could imply that the Etruscans, whose little-known language was probably not Indo-European, were late intruders and that the Indo-European Italics are represented by the Apennine culture. If so, it would date the arrival of the Italics to before c. 1800 BC, well before the time assumed by most scenarios based on the Kurgan hypothesis. Alternatively, it is possible that the diversification of the Apennine culture into regional variants after c. 1200 BCE was due to the disruption caused by mass immigration of Indo-Europeans. The archaeological record, therefore, does not provide clear-cut evidence for mass Indo-European immigration on a mainstream Kurgan timetable. In the words of Cornell, nothing in the archaeological record of the Italian Bronze and Iron Ages proves, or even suggests, that any major invasions took place between California, 1800 and California, 800 BC. Nevertheless, it should be noted that major migrations are not always evident in the archaeological record, and that therefore the possibility of a mass immigration of Indo-Europeans during the Bronze Age cannot be excluded on archaeological grounds alone. Leaving archaeology aside, the geographical distribution of the ancient languages of the peninsula may plausibly be explained by the immigration of successive waves of peoples with different languages. According to Cornell, on this model, it appears likely that the West Italic group were the first wave, followed, and largely displaced by the East Italic group. This is deduced from the marginal locations of the surviving West Italic niches. Besides Latin, putative members of the West Italic group are Faliscan, Venetic and Sicel, spoken in central Sicily. The West Italic languages were thus spoken in limited and isolated areas, whereas the East Italic group comprised the Oscan and Umbrian dialects spoken over much of central and southern Italy. However, the chronology of Indo-European immigration remains elusive, as does the relative chronology between of the Italic IE languages and the non-IE languages of the peninsula, notably Etruscan. Most scholars consider that Etruscan is a pre-IE survival part of a Mediterranean linguistic substratum. Possible support for this view may be found in the evidence that, before the spread of Celtic languages in the plain of the River Po from c. 400 BC onwards, northern and central Italy appear to have been dominated by non-IE languages. Etruscan, its apparent close relative Ra-Attic, the partially non-IE Ligurian, and the language of the undeciphered Novillerae inscriptions from the region around Ancona on the Adriatic coast. However, Etruscan could equally have been introduced by later migrants. The ancient Greek historian Herodotus preserves the tradition that the Tyrrhenoi originated in Lydia in Anatolia. Possible support for an Eastern origin for Etruscan may be provided by two inscriptions in a language closely related to Etruscan found on the island of Lemnos in the northern Aegean Sea. However, language change can be explained by scenarios other than mass migration, e.g., by small immigrant elites who acquire political, cultural hegemony over the indigenous majority and convert the latter to their language. A process known in historical linguistics is elite transfer. Language. The tribe spoke the Latin language, a member of the Western branch of the Italic languages. In turn a branch of the Indo-European family of languages. The oldest extant inscription in the Latin language is believed to be engraved on the lapis niger discovered in 1899 in the Roman Forum, dating from around 600 BC, in the mid-Roman kingdom, according to the traditional Roman chronology, but more likely close to its inception. Written in a primitive form of archaic Latin, it indicates that the Romans remained Latin speakers in the period when some historians have suggested that Rome had become Etruscanized, in both language and culture. Material culture. There is no archaeological evidence at present that Old Latium hosted permanent settlements during the Bronze Age. Some very small amounts of Apennine culture pottery shards have been found in Latium, most likely belonging to transient pastoralists engaged in transhumance. It thus appears that the Latins occupied Latium Vetus not earlier than around 1000 BC. Initially, The Latin immigrants into Latium were probably concentrated in the low hills that extend from the central Apennine range into the coastal plain. A notable area of early settlement were the Alban Hills, a plateau about 20 kilometers shy of Rome containing a number of extinct volcanoes and 5 lakes, of which the largest are Lacus Namorensis and Lacus Tusculensis. These hills provided a defensible, well-watered base. Also the hills on the site of Rome, certainly the Palatine and possibly the Capitoline and the Quirinal, hosted permanent settlements at a very early stage. The Latins appear to have become culturally differentiated from the surrounding Osco-Umbrian Italic tribes from c. 1000 BC onwards. From this time, the Latins exhibit the features of the Iron Age Villanovan culture found in Etruria and the Po Valley. In contrast, the Osco-Umbrian tribes do not exhibit Villanovan features. The Latins thus shared the broadly same material culture as the Etruscans. However, archaeologists have discerned in Latium a variant of Villanovan, dubbed the Latial culture. The most distinctive feature of Latial culture were cinerary urns in the shape of miniature tuguria. In Phase 1 of the Latium culture, these hut urns only appear in some burials, but they become standard in Phase 2 cremation burials. They represent the typical single-roomed hovels of contemporary peasants, which were made from simple, readily available materials, wattle and daub walls and straw roofs supported by wooden posts. The huts remained the main form of Latin housing until about 650 BC. The most famous exemplar was the Casa Romuli on the southern slope of the Palatine Hill, supposedly built by the legendary founder of Rome with his own hands and which reportedly survived until the time of Emperor Augustus. Around 650 BC began a period of urbanization, with the establishment of political city-states in Latium. The most notable example is Rome itself, which was originally a group of separate settlements on the various hills. It appears that they coalesced into a single entity around 625 BC, when the first buildings were established on the site of the later Roman Forum. Social culture. Relics of Indo-European culture. According to the mainstream Kurgan hypothesis, the earliest Indo-Europeans were a nomadic steppe people of Caucasian race, originating in the Eurasian steppes. Their livelihood was based on horses and herding. In the historical era, the same socio-cultural lifestyle was maintained, in the same regions, by peoples descended from the Proto-Indo-Europeans known to the Greco-Romans as Scythians, Sarmatians and Alans, whose languages belong to the Iranian branch of IE, on the basis of common steppe nomadic features in the cultures of the various Indo-European peoples in the historical era. Scholars have reconstructed elements of Proto-Indo-European culture. Relics of such elements have been discerned in Roman and Latin customs. Examples include the kinship system of pies is considered by anthropologists to best fit the so-called Omaha system, i.e., a patrilineal exogamous society, i.e., a society in which descent is recognized through the father's line and spouses are taken from outside the kinship group. This is certainly the case with Roman society. Supreme sky god. It has been securely reconstructed that the chief god of pies was a male sky god, known as Father Sky, from which descends the chief Latin god, Jupiter, deriving from archaic Jews, Pater. Pies also venerated her god of thunder and lightning. Among the Latins, this deity appears to have been merged with the sky god, as Jupiter was ascribed the power to hurl thunderbolts. Among others, Jupiter was ascribed the epithets Jupiter tonitrans, Jupiter pluvius, and Jupiter fulgurator. Fire worship. A central feature of Pi life was the domestic hearth. It is thus considered certain that Pies worshipped fire. The best-known derivative is the fire worship of the ancient Iranian religion. The Romans kept a perpetual sacred fire burning in the temple of Vesta, who was the goddess of the hearth. To symbolize the hearth, it is the only Roman temple which was round, instead of square. Forced sacrifice. Originally a nomadic steppe people, the life of Pais was centered on horses. The sacrifice of horses was probably practiced to consecrate kings. The Indicus Famine ritual involves the sacrifice of a stallion and the ritual copulation with its corpse by the queen, followed by the distribution of the horse's parts. The Romans practiced a ritual known as the October Equus, whereby the right-hand horse of a victorious team in a chariot race was sacrificed to Mars, the god of war. Its head was severed and fought over by two teams of people, and its tail hung from the regia swastika symbol. This symbol, the hooked cross, was widely used by IE-speaking peoples in both Europe and Asia. According to one theory, it was invented, and used as an ethnic emblem, by the Proto-Indo-Europeans. However, it is a documented symbol of the Stone Age Vinca culture of Shea Europe, which was probably pre-Indo-European. Whatever its origin, it was widely adopted by the Indo-Europeans, among whom it probably symbolized the sun or the sky, and was thus closely associated with their male supreme sky god. Among the Romans, it was not traditionally associated with the sky god Jupiter. However, it became associated with the sky god in Romano-Celtic southwest Gaul, where numerous dedications to Jupiter have been discovered adorned with swastikas. In the later empire, when pagan symbolism lost favor due to the advance of Christianity, it came to represent the universe, or eternal life. Latin communal tribal cults, despite their frequent internecine wars, the Latin city-states maintained close culture-Euro-religious relations throughout their history. Their most important common tribal event was the 4-day Latia or Feriae Latini, held each winter on the sacred Mons Albanus, an extinct volcano. The climax of the festival was a number of sacrifices to Jupiter Lacerus. The sacrificed meat was shared by the representatives of the Latin communities. These elaborate rituals, as did all Roman religious ceremonies, had to be performed with absolute precision and, if any procedural mistakes were made, had to be repeated from the start. The Latin festival continued to be held long after all Latium Vetus was integrated into the Roman Republic after 338 BC and into the Roman imperial era. The historian Livy, writing around AD 20, ascribed Rome's disastrous defeat by the Carthaginian general Hannibal at the Battle of Lake Trasimena in 217 BC to the impiety of the consul Gaius Flaminius, who, in his eagerness to join his army at its assembly point of Arretium, omitted to attend the Latin festival. Latin culture-religious events were also held at other common cult centers, e.g., the major common shrine to Diana at Aricia. This may be the sacred grove to Diana, which a fragment of Cato's Origines recorded dedicated, probably c. 500 BC, by various Latin communities under the leadership of the dictator of Tusculum, Egerius Baebius. Cornell argues that the Temple of Diana, reportedly founded by the Roman king Servius Tullius on the Aventine Hill at Rome, was also a common Latin shrine, as it was built outside the Pomerium or city boundary. There was also an important Latin cult center at Lavinium. Lavinium hosted the cult of the Penates, or Latin ancestor gods. Cornell suggests that the sanctuary of the 13 altars, discovered in the 1960s at Lavinium, was the site of the Penates cult. Since each of the altars differ in style and date, it has been suggested that each was erected by a separate Latin city-state.